The silk scarf was more than an accessory, it was a tactical maneuver. Claire Sommers stood before her vanity, the soft morning light revealing the faint, bruised circles beneath her eyes, the toll of another night spent staring at the ceiling, calculating how many hours of sleep she could survive on. She picked up a vintage Hermes scarf, a vibrant splash of gold and cerulean, and knotted it with surgical precision around her neck. She added a touch of rose-colored lipstick, blotted it, and checked her reflection. Modern, professional, unshakable. This was the Claire Sommers the world was allowed to see. This was the Claire who had it all together, the one who never missed a Sunday service, the one who always had a praise God ready for the church foyer. But as she grabbed her briefcase, her hand trembled slightly. The mask was becoming heavier every morning. The invisibility of the middle child. The drive to the office was a blur of grey highway and talk radio she wasn't actually listening to. Her mind was stuck on the family dinner from the night before. It had been her brother's birthday. The table at the upscale bistro was crowded with laughter, expensive appetizers, and the suffocating air of her parents' pride. And then, her brother David had said, leaning back with the glow of a man who knew he was the favorite, "The firm offered me the senior partnership. Largest signing bonus in the history of the department." Her father had beamed, clapping David on the back. "I always knew you had the drive, son. Excellence is in your DNA." Claire had sat quietly, pushing a piece of salmon around her plate. She had wanted to tell them about the project she'd just finished, the one where she'd streamlined the entire regional database, saving her company nearly 6 figures in overhead. She had waited for a gap in the conversation, a single "and how are things with you, Claire?" It never came. Instead, her mother had leaned over, adjusting Claire's collar with a sigh. "You look a bit tired, honey. Are you still at that same little firm? You know, David's firm is hiring receptionists. It might be less stressful for you, and the pay would certainly be better." The words weren't meant to be cruel, which made them hurt more. They were simply a reflection of how they saw her, the least of these, the one who worked hard but never quite arrived. Claire had just smiled, the same practiced, radiant smile she used at church, and said, "I'm doing just fine, Mom, truly." At the office, the atmosphere was a different kind of cold. Claire's cubicle was tucked in a corner where the HVAC system hummed a bit too loudly, a constant, low-frequency irritation. Her boss, Marcus, was a man who spoke in deliverables and synergy, but specialized in theft. He walked by her desk at 10:00 a.m., dropping a thick folder onto her keyboard without stopping. "I need the Sterling projections revised by end of day, Sommers. I saw some errors in your logic. Fix them." Claire opened the folder. The errors he referred to were actually her original insights, the very things that made the data work. He was stripping her name from the logic so he could present it as his own in the executive briefing. This was the 4th time this month. She looked at the screen, her eyes blurring. She felt like a ghost haunting her own life. She did the work, but Marcus took the credit. She showed up for her family, but David took the spotlight. She went to church, but she felt like she was standing outside a locked glass door, watching everyone else experience a warmth she couldn't feel. That Wednesday night, Claire found herself in her usual seat for the midweek Bible study. The air smelled of floor wax and old hymnals. The associate pastor was speaking about the joy of the Lord. He was a kind man, full of genuine zeal, but to Claire, his words sounded like a language she used to speak, but had long since forgotten. "True joy isn't a feeling," he said, pacing the small stage. "It's a fruit of the Spirit. It comes from the root of our connection to the vine." Claire opened her Bible to John 15. The pages were crisp, the gold edges still shiny. She had grown up in these pews. She knew the Christianese fluently. She knew when to nod, when to say Amen, and when to bow her head in a posture of deep prayer. But inside, it was a desert. She wasn't angry at God. Anger would have required an energy she didn't possess. She was simply done. She had prayed for a breakthrough in her career, nothing happened. She had prayed for a companion, someone to see her and love her for who she was, nothing but a string of disastrous dates with men who couldn't remember her last name. She had prayed for her parents to see her value, silence. Eventually, the praying had stopped being a conversation and started being a chore. Now it was just a routine, like brushing her teeth. You do it because you're supposed to, not because you expect it to change the state of your soul. She looked around the room. To her left, an elderly woman was weeping softly in prayer. To her right, a young couple held hands, their faces glowing. What do they have that I don't, Claire wondered, or are they just better actors? She felt a sudden, sharp pang of loneliness so intense it made her breath hitch. She wasn't just alone in her apartment or alone in her cubicle. She was alone in the presence of God. As the service ended, the high-gloss Clea returned. She stood up, smoothed her skirt, and greeted the people around her. "Wonderful word tonight, wasn't it?" she asked a friend. "Oh yes, so convicting," the friend replied. "How are you, Clea? You look wonderful, that scarf is stunning." "I'm blessed, truly blessed," Clea said, her voice steady and bright. She walked out to her car, the cool evening air hitting her face. She sat in the driver's seat and didn't start the engine. She looked at her hands on the steering wheel. They were shaking again. She realized then that she was exhausted. Not the kind of exhaustion that a weekend of sleep could fix, but a soul-deep fatigue. The momentum of her spiritual life had ground to a halt years ago, and she had been coasting on the memory of faith ever since. She leaned her head against the wheel. "I'm so tired of pretending," she whispered to the dark interior of the car. There was no lightning bolt, no voice from heaven, just the low hum of the streetlights and the distant sound of traffic. She started the car and drove home to an empty apartment, unaware that the fog she was walking into was about to get much, much thicker. The erosion had begun, and the foundation she thought was solid was actually made of sand. The Monday morning air in the office was sterile, smelling of ozone and burnt coffee. For Clea it was the smell of a battlefield. She had spent her entire weekend meticulously redoing the Sterling account projections. She hadn't just fixed the errors Marcus claimed were there. She had stayed up until 3:00 a.m. on Sunday morning building a new predictive model that was, frankly, brilliant. It was the kind of work that should have secured her a promotion, or at the very least, a seat at the table. As she walked toward Marcus's office, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment the Joseph favor she'd heard about in Sunday school would finally manifest. "Marcus," she knocked softly on his open door. He was leaning back in his leather chair, tossing a stress ball against the wall. He didn't look at her. "The Sterling file, is it done?" "It's more than done," Clea said, stepping in and placing a neatly bound folder on his desk. "I've added a variance analysis and a 3-year forecast. It changes the entire strategy for the client. I think they're going to be incredibly impressed." Marcus stopped tossing the ball. He picked up the folder, flipped through the first 3 pages, and then set it aside with a dull thud. "Good, I'll present this to the board this afternoon." Clea waited. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. I was wondering, Marcus, if I could sit in on that presentation. Since I developed the new model, I could handle the technical Q&A. Marcus finally looked at her. His eyes were cold, assessing her not as a colleague but as a tool. He gave a short, condescending laugh. "Clea, let's be realistic. The board doesn't want technical minutiae. They want a leader, they want vision. You're great with the spreadsheets, but you lack presence. You're a behind-the-scenes person. Let's keep it that way." He went back to his phone. "That'll be all." Clea walked out. The hope she had felt moments ago didn't just disappear, it curdled. She retreated to her cubicle and sat down. The fluorescent lights overhead felt suddenly too bright, exposing every flaw in her plan, every year she had wasted trying to be seen by people who chose to look through her. Sunday came again, as it always did. The ritual was the same: the high-waisted trousers, the silk blouse, the pearl earrings. She stood in the church lobby, a cup of lukewarm coffee in her hand. "Clea, how's the job?" asked Mrs. Gable, a well-meaning woman who had known Clea since she was in pigtails. "God is providing, Mrs. Gable," Clea said, the words slipping out automatically. It was the correct answer. It was the shield that kept people from asking real questions. "That's wonderful, dear, he is so faithful." Clea nodded, but her mind drifted. Faithful to what, she wondered. Faithful to Marcus, faithful to my brother David. She sat through the service, but the music felt like noise. The sermon was about living in the overflow, but Clea felt like a cracked cistern. She looked at the lyrics on the screen. "Your goodness is running after me." She wanted to believe it. She really did. But as she looked at her life, she felt like she was the one doing all the running, and the goodness was always just around a corner she couldn't quite turn. That evening, Clea tried to pray. She knelt by her bed, her knees pressing into the hardwood floor. She closed her eyes and waited for the peace that passes understanding to arrive. "Lord," she whispered, "I'm struggling, I feel invisible, I feel like I'm working for nothing. Please, just give me a sign, just one." Silence. 5 minutes passed. Her mind started drifting to the laundry she needed to do. She thought about the email Marcus had sent her on Friday evening, asking her to ghostwrite his speech for the quarterly gala. She opened her eyes, she felt foolish. This was the cycle she had lived in for years. The energy, she would start a week determined to pray more, read more, and believe more. The hit, life would happen. Marcus would steal her work, her mother would make a comment about her singleness, or a bill would come that she couldn't quite cover. The slowdown, she would feel tired, the Bible reading felt dry, the prayers felt like they were hitting the ceiling. The stop, she would give up for a few weeks, feeling guilty and spiritually bankrupt. This time, however, the stop felt different. It didn't feel like a temporary break. It felt like a heavy, rusted gate closing. Why do I keep trying? She thought, climbing into bed. Maybe some people just aren't meant for the abundant life. Maybe I'm just meant to be the background noise in everyone else's symphony. What Claire didn't know was that she wasn't as invisible as she thought. In the glass-walled office at the end of the hall, Mr. Sterling, the senior VP, was looking at the report Marcus had submitted. He was a man of quiet observation, someone who had built a career on noticing the things others missed. He flipped to the back of the report, looking at the metadata of the digital file. It didn't say created by Marcus Thorne. It said created by C. Sommers. He looked through the glass and saw Claire sitting at her desk, her head bowed, her shoulders slumped in a way that spoke of a weight no physical burden could account for. He saw the classic styling, the perfect hair, and the way she offered a polite smile to a passing coworker, a smile that never reached her eyes. He had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who was running out of road. By the end of the month, the pressure didn't just mount, it suffocated. Her car broke down on the way to work, costing her half of her emergency savings. Her mother called to tell her that David was buying a second home in the Hamptons, and wouldn't it be nice if you could come out and help him decorate? You have such an eye for the little things, Claire. The little things, that was her life. A collection of little insults, little thefts, and little silences. One Tuesday evening, Claire sat in her apartment with the lights off. She didn't want to see the high-gloss version of herself in the mirror. She just wanted to disappear. She picked up her Bible and opened it to Psalm 40. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit. Claire read the words, but they felt like a mockery. I've been waiting, she whispered into the dark. I've been waiting for 10 years, where are you? The thoughts weren't dark yet, they were just grey, a long, endless corridor of grey days stretching out into a grey future. The momentum was gone. She was no longer fighting the current, she was just letting it carry her toward whatever was next. And for the first time she didn't care if what was next was nothing at all. For 3 weeks Claire lived on a strange, brittle kind of fuel, anticipation. After the success of the Sterling account, Marcus had called her into his office. He didn't offer a thank you, but he offered something that, to Claire, felt even better. He offered a future. There are big changes coming, Claire, he had said, leaning over a map of the new regional territories. The Sterling win has accelerated my move to the director's suite. I'm going to need a chief of operations. Someone who knows the data inside and out. Someone I can trust. He hadn't explicitly said the job was hers, but he had looked her in the eye and told her to keep up the excellent pace. Claire took it as a promise. For the first time in years, the Sunday morning service felt lighter. She sang the hymns with a little more breath. She even treated herself to a new charcoal wool coat, imagining herself walking into that corner office, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the respect she had earned with her sweat and silence. She spent the next month working like a woman possessed. She stayed until the cleaning crews arrived, ensuring every transition document for Marcus was flawless.